Okay, hi everybody. I'm Matt Witeska. I'm the head of production at Six to Start. I'm talking today to Emily Short, the writer of our newly released Matchmaker New Adventure and the creative director at Fail Better Games. Emily, thanks for talking to me today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, absolute pleasure. So I really, just kind of wanted to talk over how we were gifted with Matchmaker as a script and what the process was like, kind of putting it together. I suppose to start off with, obviously, you're a very experienced writer with a lot of past history there. What in particular kind of brought you to our Six to Start submissions process? How did you find us?
Well, I had actually been looking for opportunities to do more audio work.
Hmm.
I had written a play for the BBC, and it was really exciting to do and a lot of fun, and also sort of showed me how much potential there was in that creative space and how much of it I didn't know yet. And so I had been kind of keeping an eye out for, is there more of that I could do?
Sure.
So when I saw the call come across various channels I'm on, I leapt on that. So
You were actually the first person to submit. I don't know if told you that, but we were all very kind of nervous internally. It's our first time doing this kind of direct commissioning, and we were, wondering where we were going to get people that knew their stuff, and where we were going to get anybody at all. And then, seeing your name pop up in my inbox the first time, we were all quite excited that
oh, thank you.
someone with the amount of experience and talent that you've got would want to come and work with us. So it was great, and it was a real pleasure to do so.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
I mean I've known of the studio for quite a long time and
sure.
several people there, so it seemed to me like a really lovely chance to have.
Yeah, it felt like a really good fit for us as well, and we were really thrilled with the with the idea for Matchmaker because I've been kind of pushing internally a little bit for us to explore our kind of potential rom-com credentials and our ability to address some kind of more contemporary characters and kind of just to kind of not everyday storylines, but kind of more modern narratives, I suppose. What kind of brought that idea towards you? Um, it's not an obvious idea for an audio story, kind of a long conversation between two people going through a relationship a bump, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I think that probably the biggest influence on that was that I had been listening particularly to lots and lots of John Finnemore, who's like my favorite
Sure.
radio writer. And so I've heard all of Cabin Pressure roughly a million times, but also had been listening to his Double Act series, where it's just sort of two characters talking about something, often in some situation that is quite peculiar. So,
Mm,
there's one with, I think, Queen Victoria recording a message or something like that. I forget the exact details. But often, somewhat out there premises. But then everything just kind of develops from these two people talking.
yeah.
And I was, I mean, sort of the reaction that I always have to something that really impresses me is like, okay, I have got to like try. I'm not going to do as awesome a job as this, but I have got to like try my hand at this kind of form. So when I saw that you were looking for rom-coms, I was like, okay, well, what would be a way that we could bring that story out and have the player moving from place to place and have that make sense, but also kind of play with this concept that I want to try.
Yeah, it was a really fun idea and structure. And when we started working on it with the actors, they were really excited to deal with something that was much more like emotionally focused than we
Mm-hmm.
ordinarily would do, and really have a lot of time to dig our teeth into that kind of psychological and more emotional narrative, I suppose. To have all of the movement come from the development of the relationship rather than the explosions in the rearview mirror is quite a nice
Yeah.
thing to work on. Um, do you think that that kind of that the very detailed and lived-in psychology of the characters is something that you're kind of quite well known for with your interactive fiction work, and do you think that's something that has that you brought with you from your past writing into Matchmaker, or is it just kind of an ongoing interest, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely. I find it easier to think about characters than I do to think about plot, right? Like I'm always sort of starting from, and people come to stories from different angles, but usually, I'm thinking from the perspective of character first,
Hmm.
and that's just kind of a habitual thing. And then it's kind of okay. Well, how do we construct the plot that is going to bring out their goals and sort of explore the journey that they need to be on?
Sure.
So I think that's there's a lot of just kind of extant process from other things that I've done that did come into it.
Great. Yeah, I think the flavor of writer, plot, or character first is certainly something that's it kind of really comes across for a lot more clearly than I think people might expect before they start working on this stuff. And
Yeah.
doing the sort of directing side of things, I definitely can tell the difference, and it's really nice to work on both flavors. But I definitely appreciated having all the emotional beats to dig into with Matchmaker. Um, do you with the digging into the psychology and the character base of things and building things from a character point of view outwards, what does the process for that look like for you? Is it kind of are you like is your process similar to that of some novelists where you have massive character biographies? Is it more a kind of talking to the characters in the mirror kind of process? What does that look like?
I mean, so everything that I ever do happens in my notebook,
Hmm.
and usually I won't have anything sort of quite as precise as an outline to start with, but I'll have a bunch of sort of bullet points of what am I initially thinking. And those usually sort of wind up turning into some kind of structured graph. And obviously, like this is very much this is a game designer thing. This is a thing about where I come from as a game developer. Like once I start thinking about here's this aspect of this character, here's that aspect of this character, then I start to think about that as part of a system. And like,
Hmm.
are other characters reflecting those qualities? Are they antithetical to those qualities? Like how are we sort of creating the balance? What's the distribution of things here? And obviously sometimes you're writing a story that really is just very focused on one character and everybody else is kind of a satellite to them.
Hmm. Yeah, that's like kind of not quite sort of programmatic thinking, but very kind of design led thinking and
Yeah,
um,
design thinking and just bunches of notes, and then often like I'll write something down and then 2 pages later I'll have completely changed my mind on it. So there's kind of this ongoing flow.
yeah,
um,
uh,
but
definitely an iterative design process familiar to anyone
yeah,
who's worked in games. Yeah, so with the you're talking about your sort of design-led kind of writing process and uh, graphing the characters' emotional states out and things like that. And I've noticed that my kind of original background in theatre often leads me to reach for particular sort of tools and phrases and narrative setups. I'm often pursuing kind of ideas of status changes within a scene, and that's whether someone is higher authority or lower authority in a scene. And I'm wondering if you find yourself kind of approaching things in particular ways, or finding yourself reaching for particular tools regularly because of that kind of design first approach.
yeah, I think it's probably less a matter of going for specific themes. Like I don't think I have an equivalent to status in terms of something that I'm always digging into or coming back to, but it's definitely affected my process.
Hmm.
And in games, you often don't have very much spare time. Like, as a game writer, you need to write something that is going to be delivered in a few words and is going to get across the point to the player quickly. And you really need to know, what am I trying to communicate every moment?
Hmm.
And so I bring that process back to other things that I'm writing as well. And so for things like this, I will often create an initial draft where it's not the final dialogue at all, but each of the sentences is kind of stubbed in as a what is this sentence accomplishing
Mm.
in this scene? Like there's got to be something that this sentence is doing to move the story forward onto the next beat. What do we need to accomplish between the beginning and end of the scene, and then what are the sort of emotional beats to get us from one point to the other? And so, sometimes it's a little bit more naturalistic than that, and sometimes I just like a joke in the voice of the character, comes to me, and obviously I'm not going to resist writing that down, if I think of it. But I do kind of let myself get that structure first, and then come back and sort of edit the text once I've kind of figured out what it's all trying to accomplish. And I think that I think it's I think it's quite helpful to have that approach, especially if you're trying to write to particular time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also it really I didn't know that was how you worked, but one of the things I was going to compliment you at some point about was how easy the actors, when we came to record Matchmaker, found it to pull out the emotional threads of the scenes and really know where the big turns were and where the key emotions should be at every time. And that's not something that everyone accomplishes in a script. That's often, a large part of what my job as a director is, and having something that is so clearly um, blueprinted in terms of the emotional arc of each scene is wonderful to work with. So it's fascinating to hear that that is kind of explicitly part of your process because boy, it really works.
Well, that's lovely to hear. I'm really glad. I mean, I think I should also acknowledge like the other thing that I have been doing with my audio work is talking through it with my brother, who is an
Mm,
actor. And so that's kind of the other thing is like he knows how is this gonna work out. And I didn't spend a huge amount of time with him on this. I think we did talk about it a little bit, but when I was doing my radio play,
mm,
I actually had several sessions with him where he sat down with me in the script, and we kind of divided up the parts and read through it to practice and make sure that it worked. And then he gave me a lot of feedback about kind of here's the actor's perspective on this. Like, here's what you're giving me. Here's a point where it sort of the transition feels a little weird, and it feels like you could do more to set up the next scene. So that was a
mm.
really helpful kind of craft improvement exercise as
Yeah,
well.
that's such a good bit of advice actually. Is I think audio specific writing is often something people approach after having done a bit of other writing previously. So, I came from theatre, and a lot of people come from writing novels or writing games or writing for the stage or for screen, and seeking out that kind of additional support to help you really refine the particularities of the medium is a really good bit of advice for other people looking to work in audio.
Yeah.
A lot of the ideas we get pitched sometimes are fantastic story ideas, but they rely really heavily on us being able to see what's happening, which we
Yeah.
we just can't. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was also like on the radio play. I had a fantastic script editor as well who was
Mm,
putting the whole thing together. So she was like she had come and commissioned it from me and was sort of like, okay, like this is your first time writing for audio. Let me tell you a bunch of things you probably don't know. So it was like this wonderful sort of combination of training, but it was such a good experience that I then really wanted to expand on it.
well, we're really grateful if it led you to us. Um, on that kind of limited information bandwidth thing, that's something that we're dealing with in audio, and it's also something that I imagine is one of the particular challenges of writing sort of text only or largely text based interactive fiction. Um, I'm wondering, like, kind of, how do you manage so well to thread the needle between over communicating to the player or the listener, and not giving them enough information to kind of correctly visualize or understand what's happening. It's something we are constantly struggling with in house.
Yeah. I mean, partly, I mean, some of it is that very explicit kind of process I was talking about earlier of knowing exactly what facts does the listener need to get in order to
Right.
understand this story, right? Because that's something that in game design that comes up quite a lot as well because you're you're trying to distribute your story through an environment often and letting people explore and find things. And so you have to know exactly like which bits of this story are mandatory and I've got to put them somewhere where the player has to find them. And then which
Mm.
bits can I kind of scatter around. And so that really teaches a kind of information priority thinking, right? Like it's like, okay, if you get nothing else, I have to make sure that you get these things. And then I think layered on top of that is just like the Finnemore influence again. Like one of his, he does so many really amazing things with what is revealed to the listener versus what is withheld. And there are a
Mm.
number of his scenes where the comedy arises from like either the characters are in a situation where if you tried to film it, it would just be so wacky that you would be just distracted by that weirdness. Or, sometimes there's some really key piece of information that he's holding back from you until late in the scene because, that's something that would be completely obvious if you were filming this. But because it's in audio, he can keep that information back until somebody chooses to mention the important fact. And so I had really picked up a lot of kind of those kinds of moments in what he was doing. And so wanted to kind of explore, not that I do a lot of, I think, real surprise reveals exactly in Matchmaker, but
No.
at a lower level, that kind of thing was in my mind.
Yeah, well, I think certainly there's you can detect the effort that's put in to manage when particular things are revealed to the player, and it's difficult to accomplish that without it feeling overly contrived. That
Yeah.
you're withholding things that the characters would say to one another if they were talking honestly. I think grounding that in the emotional reality of the difficulty that they're facing in Matchmaker is really nice. It worked really well. Yeah, I think what was the hardest part about Matchmaker? It sounds like in a way the story kind of came out of your desire to experiment in a particular format and grew from your process. Was there anything that was just a real challenge to get done?
Yeah, I did struggle quite a bit with the character of Antonia.
Mm,
And that was it was because I felt like I had a really clear idea of Laura and what her issue was, and her sort of habit of just jumping the gun in relationships all the time and rushing things and like people getting scared and disconnecting. And for a long time, a lot of the sort of drafts that I was coming up with really made it a story about her, which I didn't want it to be just her story. I really wanted it to be a two-person story where they both needed to learn something to resolve it.
mm,
I think rom-coms that don't do that feel like they're missing something important.
absolutely.
So, there was this kind of like, well, you know, I don't want Antonia to be just kind of this shrinking violet, and the problem is that she feels overwhelmed by Laura, and then like eventually somehow she gets over it. Like that felt like I was making her very passive,
Mm,
and not really giving her enough of a personality. And after quite a bit of sort of arm wrestling this, I realized that basically I needed to distribute the character problem between the two characters. Like they are both in different ways dealing with the process of, how and when do I look for a deeper commitment, and
mm,
what are requirements on my side for that, what do I need to look for in the other person, and when is the other person going to be ready. And once I had sort of recognized that and was able to kind of split that out between them, then everything worked much better. But it really, there was a long period where I was just like, well, great, I have one half of this. And then
yeah.
there was like, the outline would have things in it like, and then like Antonia has a personal revelation. Like that was like the line, right? It was like, no, this is this needs work.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of the things I really liked about the script from the off early drafts was it's not a common thing for us to have these stories about relationships that are explicitly dealing with the particular problems and conversations that you have in the later stages of a relationship. These
Yeah.
these stories are often about the beginning when people are negotiating what their relationship will be like and where people's boundaries are in particular. But this was what I like so much about this story is that it's about respecting the pre-agreed boundaries, and they've talked about the balance in their relationship being maintained in particular ways, and Antonia worried that that's not happening in the same way she wanted it to because of some plot, and
Yeah.
it's a really it's a refreshing kind of approach, and I think it's interesting that that was the trickiest part of doing it, I guess, because that is kind of the heart of the drama, and that's where that power comes from, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that I wanted it to be, kind of what I think of as non fairy tale rom com, right? I
Yes.
didn't want to write something that was just sort of sparkle and glitz. I mean, I'm partly because I'm just bad at that. Like, I have occasionally tried to write things that are very fluff and very kind of light, and I somehow it always winds up managing to be about like there's something like some point creeps in that I didn't realize I was in danger of making. So, but I think also, like I've felt for a long time, there just are not enough stories out there about kind of, as you say, late stage relationships, maybe before they're married, or even, stories about married people where there is a very, very established relationship. It's not that things are on the rocks necessarily.
Mm,
It's not that, like, we're getting a divorce and having a midlife crisis and like sleeping with a nanny, but it's, you go on having your relationship evolve after the point where you've fallen in love with somebody.
yeah.
And those stories are so rarely told in any detail, I think, relative to everything else. I mean, not that there are none of them out there, but
Yeah, it's thinking about it just as you're talking. It's kind of a lot of, even when we do get stories about people that are married, they're often these kind of moralistic stories of right or wrong. Somebody is cheating, somebody is withholding information, somebody is crossing a boundary flagrantly. That it's very
yeah.
much a kind of classically, unfortunately, it's a kind of like bad husband nagging wife kind of formula.
Yeah.
Um, and it reminds me almost of like the propensity, like those things are easy to telegraph to audiences because it's a clear black and white moral story about the societally understood ways to behave in a relationship. You don't cheat on your partner, you don't steal the money from them, etc., etc., etc. And it reminds me a little bit of how so many games are shooters because it's very easy to calculate if you're pointing a gun at something.
Yeah.
It's real hard to draw emotional nuance. So yeah, I'm very proud to be working on something like Matchmaker, which takes the time to deal in the more difficult, more nuanced emotional negotiations and problem solving that we do in relationships. Yeah, I'm really
Yeah,
proud.
I mean, something. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off
no, no.
there.
I was mumbling to the end of my point. Go ahead.
I mean, this ties into. I mean, we seem to be like covering the territory of all of my pet peeves about like what stories are told in popular culture. But
I love
another
it.
of those peeves is that often people tend to assume that stories with conflict can only be told if somebody is a villain, or
Mm,
that good people or goodness is not very interesting. And I
yeah,
actually think that's completely wrong. Like, being a good person is hard and complicated and takes judgment. It's not just a matter of willpower and not screwing up. There's like all of this sort of, how am I going to navigate these situations? And it's effortful and it's interesting. And I think we make a mistake not to sort of be more engaged in telling those stories, which sounds very, I don't know, sort of utopian or something. But
I
I
couldn't
really
agree
like
more.
writing stories where basically nobody there is the jerk, right?
Yeah,
Like, there's a reason they're not getting along, but it's not. Yeah,
yeah. No, goodness is not an inherent quality in somebody. It's a process they perform over time, and that process takes effort, and
yeah.
you've got to do it every day. And I think you. Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a pet peeve of mine as well. No, yeah. Clearly, this is why we both like Matchmaker so much. What are you most proud of in Matchmaker? Then is it addressing these pet peeves particularly?
I think it's partly, yeah, it's partly doing that, but I think also, I wasn't quite sure right up until the end of the writing process how I was going to do the final scene,
Mm,
and just kind of like the wording of it, and how we were going to land. And I ultimately wound up being pretty happy with that.
yeah.
Like there were a couple of sort of like specific small jokes that I thought of that really felt like, okay, this is doing some of the important work, but it's also going to make this, what is in some ways a fairly intense emotional moment, like nonetheless open it up enough to be tolerable, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I was happy about that. I was also happy about kind of what I landed on ultimately in terms of plot driver, because I considered and discarded many different reasons why the relationship might be undergoing this particular stress at this moment, and some of them were just there was a period where I was sort of thinking about, is the issue something around a disagreement about having kids, because that is such a like
Mm,
serious major thing, or their plans about how they might start a family don't align or something. And even sort of just kind of digging into like different possibilities there, and it I bounced off that for two reasons. One was that I felt like some of the stuff that it could get into was just too dark tonally for, it wasn't the story
mhm.
that I was pitching you, and it was too it just went in some more grim directions potentially. And then also it just felt like it was not really my story to tell, because I am happily without children, and that is my preference and my partner's preference, and I it's not a thing that I know other people experience this, and I could empathetically try to present that, but it isn't kind of a core experience that I've had that I would be able to bring to this. So, I also don't have the particular issue that does happen in the plot, but it's closer to a thing where I feel like I can put myself there. So
Yeah, I feel like the balance of financial input into a relationship is one of the most common problems people have, and it's it even though the scale that these characters are dealing with it on, in terms of them both being uh, ostensibly very successful people, and family money is not a common thing that everybody has, but um, worrying about whether or not you're pulling your weight in the relationship is a very common. It felt very real and very universal to me. And yeah, that final scene, we were recording. I mean, I was even sadder than I ordinarily am to not be able to record the in person. Right now, we did it remotely, as we are recording this interview. But even remotely, working with the actors, we all drew ourselves to tears with the final scene, kind of
oh,
happy and joyously emotional kind of tears at the end. And yeah, the it's a really lovely, intimate scene, as I'm sure the people listening to this interview will know by now because they will have listened to it. And I'm really proud of I'm particularly proud of where we landed with that one. So I'm glad that it meant a lot to you as well.
yeah. I mean, this obviously, but possibly our interviewees don't. That I haven't heard this, so I'm
Yeah,
really excited to
uh,
actually
kind of on
hear the
purpose. Yeah.
performance. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, we are well. We actually got the final audio from our sound designer this morning.
Oh right,
It's
okay.
it's going through. Well, I say final audio. We got the edited audio this morning, and it is being approved by our executive producer and CEO. And once it's ready, I will be sending it across to you. Don't worry. But
Awesome.
yeah,
Oh,
no, it's
that's
I
great.
was really proud of the performances that our actors put in, and I'm really excited for people to hear it, which will be happening pretty soon. Emily, this has been a really lovely conversation. I've been thrilled to talk to you about this stuff, and I always I'm a bit of a geek about process, and I love digging into the nitty gritty with other people that do it, and I think it's a really nice way of looking at a story.